Today I'm going to tell you a story that will make your blood boil. Imagine that you are 5 months pregnant, standing at your husband's funeral, clutching your belly as you say your final goodbye. But before you can even leave, your mother-in-law shoves legal papers into your hand and tells you that as of today, you have no connection to your husband's house. She tells you that it belongs to them now, and you are officially barred from entering your own home. They thought they had left a pregnant widow with nothing, but what they didn't know was that in just a few days, something was going to happen that would completely destroy their lives forever. But this pain isn't something I can explain. This is Emily's story, told by her own voice. My name is Emily, and at 28, I thought I had already won at life. I had Mark. To anyone else, he was a tall, quiet guy with a laugh that could fill a room, but to me, he was home. We had spent the last 3 years turning a dilapidated $450,000 craftsman in a quiet suburb of Seattle into a masterpiece. I'm a senior marketing analyst, and Mark worked in logistics. But on the weekends, we were a renovation team. We spent every Saturday covered in sawdust and paint, breathing life into old floorboards. 4 months ago, we finally finished the nursery. I remember standing in the doorway, my hand resting on my 5-month-old baby bump, looking at the walls. We'd painted them a specific shade called Sunset Peach. Mark had spent 3 weekends assembling the hand-carved crib while I organized tiny onesies by color. It wasn't just a room, it was the start of our legacy. Our house was supposed to be a fortress, a place where my daughter, Lily, would take her first steps. But a fortress is only as strong as the people you let inside, and my mistake was opening the gates to people who didn't want to build a home. They wanted to colonize one. Because we had extra space, we let Mark's mother, Beatrice, and his sister, Chloe, move in. Chloe had just gone through a messy, expensive divorce, and Beatrice claimed her nerves were too shot to live alone. Mark, with his heart of gold, looked at me with those puppy dog eyes and said, "It's just until they get on their feet, Em." I loved him, so I said yes. I didn't realize that while I was working 50-hour weeks to pay the $2,800 mortgage, the property taxes, and the grocery bills, Beatrice and Chloe were measuring the curtains, imagining a life where I was no longer in the picture. I was the one providing the air they breathed, yet they were already planning how to suffocate me. If you looked at us from the outside, we were the perfect extended family. But inside those walls, I was a ghost in my own home. I was the bank, the chef, and the cleaner, while Beatrice and Chloe treated the house like a 5-star resort they'd inherited by divine right. I remember the first time I realized how deep the entitlement ran. It was a Thursday, and I'd just crawled home after a grueling day of back-to-back client presentations. I found Chloe sitting in my living room, wearing my $300 designer silk robe, drinking a glass of my expensive vintage wine. When I asked her why she was in my closet, she didn't even look up from her phone. She just scoffed and said, "It was just sitting there, Emily. Besides, Mark said what's yours is ours. Don't be so provincial." Provincial. That was her favorite word for me. To them, I was just a girl from a simple family who got lucky by marrying their son and brother. They ignored the fact that I was the one who had written a check for $12,000 to clear Chloe's credit card debt so her wages wouldn't be garnished. They ignored the fact that I paid for Beatrice's premium health insurance and her $1,800 monthly allowance because she claimed her pension wasn't enough to cover her lifestyle. Beatrice was the master of the microaggression. She'd walk into the kitchen while I was prepping a healthy dinner for the baby's sake and sigh. "Oh, Emily, more kale? Mark always loved my heavy cream potatoes. It's a shame you're making him eat like a rabbit. No wonder he's looking so tired lately." I stayed silent for Mark. I watched him work extra shifts just to keep them happy, his eyes growing sunken, his shoulders drooping under the weight of their demands. He was my protector, yes, but he was also their victim. He couldn't see that his mother was a parasite who viewed his love as a blank check. Every time I tried to bring up the finances, he'd squeeze my hand and whisper, "They have no one else, Em. Just bear with it until the baby comes. Then things will change." He was right. Things did change, but not the way he promised. One rainy Tuesday, the world stopped turning. A call from the highway patrol, a multi-car pileup. Mark was gone before the paramedics even reached his door. And while my soul was shattering into a million jagged pieces, Beatrice and Chloe weren't mourning a son or a brother. They were calculating the inheritance. The day of the funeral was a blur of gray skies and suffocating silence. I felt like a hollow shell, standing by Mark's casket with my hand on my stomach, trying to tell my daughter that her father was a hero. I was 5 months pregnant, widowed, and barely able to breathe. As the service ended and the crowd began to disperse, Beatrice approached me. I thought she was coming for a hug. Instead, she pressed a thick manila envelope into my hand. "It's best we handle this now," she whispered, her voice as cold as the winter ground, "before you get any ideas." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. They were legal papers, a formal demand for me to vacate the family estate within 48 hours. I looked at her confused. "Beatrice, what is this? This is my home. Mark and I—" "Mark is gone," Chloe interrupted, stepping up beside her mother. "And this house was bought with our family's legacy. You were just a guest, Emily, a guest who's overstayed her welcome. We've already contacted the life insurance company. That $65,000 policy, that belongs to his mother for raising him. You have your own parents. Go to them." I was too numb to fight back then. I drove back to the house, my mind racing, only to find the nightmare had already begun. When I pulled into the driveway, my heart dropped. 3 of my large suitcases and several cardboard boxes were sitting on the wet porch. I rushed to the front door and turned my key. It wouldn't budge. The locks had been changed while I was at the cemetery. I pounded on the door, screaming for them to let me in. The window upstairs opened, and Chloe leaned out, looking down at me with a smirk. "I told you, Emily, you don't live here anymore." I managed to find a spare key hidden in a potted plant that they'd missed. I burst inside, heading straight for the nursery to grab my prenatal vitamins and the folder where I kept my medical records. But Chloe was waiting in the hallway. She blocked my path, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying kind of joy. "Get out," she hissed. When I tried to push past her, she didn't hesitate. She shoved me hard. I tripped over a box and tumbled backward, landing painfully on the concrete of the driveway. I gasped, clutching my belly, the terror for my baby instantly overriding the grief for my husband. "Don't come back," Beatrice shouted from the doorway as she tossed my purse onto the wet grass. Neighbors were peering through their curtains, watching the perfect family throw a pregnant widow into the street. I sat there on the cold pavement, shivering, realizing that the people I had fed and housed for 3 years didn't just want me gone. They wanted me destroyed. I didn't go to a hotel. I didn't go back to the house to beg. I drove straight to my parents' home, my body shaking so hard I could barely keep the car on the road. When my father opened the door and saw me, drenched from the rain, covered in driveway grit, and clutching my stomach in silent agony, his face transformed. My father is a retired civil attorney, a man who spent 40 years studying the fine print of human greed. He didn't just give me a blanket and a bowl of soup. He gave me a mission. "They think they're playing a game of emotions, Emily," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble as he laid a leather-bound folder on the dining table. "But they've stepped into a game of law, and they've already lost." We spent the next 6 hours sitting under the glow of the kitchen light, dissecting every document we had. Beatrice and Chloe had assumed that because the house was originally in Mark's name before we married, it was family property. They were wrong. 2 years ago, as a wedding anniversary gift, Mark and I had sat down with a notary and updated the deed. We had established a joint tenancy with right of survivorship. In plain English, the moment Mark's heart stopped, the house didn't pass to his estate. It didn't go to his mother. It became 100% mine, automatically, legally, irrevocably. By changing the locks and physically shoving a pregnant woman off the property, they hadn't just been mean. They had committed a self-help eviction, a criminal act in our state. And the $65,000 life insurance policy? Mark had updated the beneficiary to me the day we found out I was pregnant. Beatrice had been calling the insurance company based on a 10-year-old scrap of paper that was now legally worthless. But I wasn't going to tell them that. Not yet. "I don't just want them out, Dad," I whispered, looking at a photo of Mark on my phone. "I want them to feel the exact moment the ground disappears from under their feet. I want them to know what it feels like to be homeless." I spent the next 2 weeks in a state of Cold War silence. I ignored Beatrice's taunting texts about how she was redecorating my nursery into a guest lounge. I ignored Chloe's social media posts of her drinking wine in my kitchen with the caption, "Finally found peace." While they were celebrating their theft, I was working. I gathered 3 years of bank statements showing every cent of Chloe's debt I'd paid and every mortgage payment I'd made from my personal account. I filed for an emergency restraining order and a wrongful eviction suit, requesting the maximum statutory damages. I was no longer a grieving widow. I was a legal nightmare. The 2 weeks of silence ended on a crisp Monday morning. I arrived at the house not in a taxi, but in a 3-car convoy. My father, a professional locksmith, and 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies. As the locksmith began drilling into the front door, the curtains twitched. Seconds later, Beatrice flung the door open, her face twisted in a mask of indignation. "How dare you!" she shrieked, pointing a finger at me. "I told the police you were trespassing. Leave this property now." The deputy didn't move. Instead, he stepped forward and held up a signed court order. "Actually, ma'am, the court has confirmed that Emily is the sole legal owner of this residence. You and your daughter have been living here illegally after a criminal self-help eviction. You have 20 minutes to gather your essentials. Everything else stays until a formal inventory is conducted." The color drained from Beatrice's face, turning her skin a sickly, ashen gray. Behind her, Chloe appeared, still in her pajamas, clutching a designer bag she'd bought with my money. "You can't do this. We're family," she cried. "Family doesn't shove a pregnant woman onto a wet driveway," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And family doesn't steal a dead man's legacy." As the locksmith handed me the new keys, the second deputy stepped toward Beatrice. "Ma'am, there's also the matter of the $4,000 you withdrew from the estate account after the death certificate was filed. That's identity fraud and theft." I watched, unmoved, as they clicked handcuffs onto Beatrice's wrists. She was escorted to the cruiser, sobbing about her reputation, while Chloe was left standing on the sidewalk with nothing but a single trash bag of clothes, the exact same way she had left me. The legal fallout was total. Beatrice was sentenced to 12 months of probation and ordered to pay $50,000 in damages for emotional distress and wrongful eviction. To pay me back, she had to sell her own car and drain what was left of her meager savings. She is now living in a tiny 1-bedroom subsidized apartment on the other side of the state. Chloe? She disappeared the moment the money ran out, moving in with a distant cousin who reportedly makes her work 2 jobs just to stay on the couch. As for me, 4 months later, the Sunset Peach Nursery finally served its purpose. I went into labor on a Tuesday, the same day of the week Mark passed, but this time Tuesday brought life. My daughter, Lily, was born healthy and strong. At the welcome home party my parents hosted, I looked around at the people filling the room. My house was mine again. My heart was healing. And as I held Lily, I realized that I hadn't just won back a building. I had protected our future. Mark was gone, but his love had left me with the strength to be a lioness. I looked at my daughter and whispered, "Don't worry, baby. No one is ever taking our home again." What a powerful journey of resilience and justice. But now I have to ask you, at what point did Beatrice and Chloe cross the line for you? Was it the moment of the funeral betrayal or the physical shove on the driveway? This story is a powerful reminder that while grief can make us vulnerable, the law remains a shield for those who stand their ground. Please keep in mind that this video is a dramatization created for societal reform and educational awareness. We share these stories to expose the dark realities of greed and betrayal so that you can protect yourself, and more importantly, so you never repeat these toxic behaviors in your own life. True justice isn't just about reclaiming a house, it's about breaking the cycle of abuse. If you found value in Emily's triumph today, please subscribe and hit the bell icon to join our community for your daily dose of truth and justice.